Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Peace be upon you, may peace, mercy and blessings of Allah be upon you. This time I will discuss a very important topic. Narrative about Islam without the leadership of the Caliph will only remain a name. Some verses of the Quran related to the concept of the Caliph, which means substitute or representative of God or leader. There are several other verses that discuss the leadership and role of the Caliph in managing the earth and upholding justice. The following verses described as a whole show that the concept of the Caliph in the Quran is not only limited to one verse or one context, but includes various aspects such as the replacement of the people, the granting of power, and requests for help to God. Here are some important points related to the concept of the Caliph in the Quran. Surah Al-Baqarah verse 30. And remember when your Lord said to the angels, I wanted to make the Caliph on earth. They said, do you want to make people who damage and shed blood there, while we are praising you and purify your name? He said, really, I know what you don't know. Surah Shad verse 26. Allah said, O David, indeed, you make the Caliph, ruler, on earth, then give a decision, case, among humans fairly and do not follow the passions, because it will mislead you from the way of Allah. Really, people who are misguided from the way of Allah will get a heavy punishment, because they forget the day of calculation. Al-Araf verse 69. And are you surprised that there is a warning that comes from your Lord through a man from your own circle, to give you a warning? Remember when he makes you the caliphs after the Noah, and he gives you more in the strength of the body and stature. So, remember the pleasure of God so that you are lucky. Al-Araf verse 129. They, the Moses, said, we have been oppressed, by Pharaoh, before you come to us and after you come. Moses, replied, hopefully your Lord destroys your enemies and makes you caliph on earth, then he will see how you do. Al-An'am verse 165. And he is the one who makes you the caliphs on earth and he lifts, degrees, some of you above the other, to test you for, gifts, that he gives to you. Indeed, your Lord is very quick to give punishment, and truly he is forgiven, most merciful. Yunus verse 14. Then, we make you the caliph as a substitute for, them, on earth after they are to see how you do. Yunus verse 73. Then, they deny it, Noah, then we save him and the people who are with him on the ship, and we make them the caliph and we sank those who deny our verses. So pay attention to how the people will be given the warning. Fatir verse 39. It is the one who makes you the caliphs on earth. Whoever infidels, then, as a result of, his disbelief will befall himself. And the disbelief of the infidels will only add wrath to the side of their God. And the disbelief of the infidels will only add to their mere losses. Al-Naml verse 62. Isn't he, Allah, who permits, prayer, of people who are in trouble when he prayed to him, and eliminated the tribulation and made you, human, as the caliph, leader, on earth? Is there a God, others, very little, the blessings of God, that you remember? Because the main function of the caliph is as a representative or guardian of Allah to carry out the mandate of the Diram, implementing the law set by God for the jinn and human creatures as the implementation of their obedience to God as servants, then God has sent a legal book that they must implement and apply to every people, namely in the form of all the books of God including Torah, Zabur, Gospels, and all have been accommodated in the Quran. Some verses expressly order and require the implementation of God's law in every decision related to every legal issue, and also all the commands and prohibitions of God for every people. The following are some verses related to God's commands on the obligation to use God's law in every aspect of the life of the people and must be controlled by the caliph as the person who obtains the mandate from God. Surah Al-Ma'idah verse 44. Really, we lowered the Torah, in it, there are, instructions and light. Which with the book the prophets surrendered to God gave a decision on the case of the Jews, as well as their scholars and priests, because they were ordered to maintain the books of God and they were witnesses to them. Therefore do not be afraid of humans, but fear me. And do not sell my verses at low prices. Whoever does not decide on the case with what God revealed, then they are infidels. Surah Al-Ma'idah verse 45. We have set for them in it, the Torah, that lives, replied, with lives, eyes with eyes, nose with nose, ears with ears, teeth with teeth, and wounds, even, there are qisas, the same reply. Whoever releases, qisas rights, then that, becomes, readying for him. Qs. Al-Ma'idah verse 46. And we continue their footsteps by sending Isa putra Maryam, confirmed the previous book, namely the Torah. And we lower the gospel to him, in it there are instructions and light, and justify the previous book, and as a guide and teaching for people who are pious. Surah Al-Ma'idah verse 47. And let the gospel followers decide the case according to what God revealed in it. Whoever does not decide on the case according to what God revealed, then they are the wicked people. Surah Al-Ma'idah verse 48. And we have lowered the book, Al-Quran, to you, Muhammad, by bringing the truth, which justifies the books that were passed down and guarding it, then decide on their case according to what Allah revealed and do not follow their desires by leaving the truth that has come to you. For every people between you, we give rules and bright paths. The gift that He has given to you, then compete for good. Only to God you all return, then He is told to you what you used to be a dispute. Surah Al-Ma'idah verse 49. And should you decide on the case between them according to what God revealed and do not follow their wishes, and be aware of them, do not let them empower you for some of what God has revealed to you. Surah Al-Ma'idah verse 50. What is the ignorant law they want? Law, who is better than, the law, of God for those who believe, religion. From all explanations of the verses of the Quran mentioned above, related to the concept of caliphate in Islam, it is very clear and absolutely necessary, because in the implementation of the law and practice of Muslims, there are always individuals that can be carried out directly by each person, especially related to religious worship or ritual or fiqh agreements that can be adjusted to the situation but still may not conflict with the law set by God. Actually, the level of the caliph's leadership in Islam must be globally, which has a single leadership, and for each region or country is carried out at a lower caliph level, which is referred to as Amirul Mu'minin, which must also be absolutely under the control of the single caliph globally, the world. In the current era and situation where the history of the caliphate has been torn down through a long process by the secularism system whose distribution begins through the process of colonialism, especially carried out and begins with Western countries, they have succeeded in overthrowing the caliphate system since 1924, until now they have controlled the world through the Nations Union. In this era of secularism, Islamic religion still exists but only individuals and must be separated from all political and state systems, so it is not possible to apply totally Islamic rules and laws or kafah both in the local or state region, especially at the global level. Thus, as long as there is no global single caliph's leadership, Islam actually only lives in the form of a name, even though the identity of the number of adherents is large, because it does not have the authority in applying God's law in the secular state system, while the application of God's law is the main requirement and obligation of the purpose of the creation of jinn and humans, whose implementation is mandated to the caliph. So if people who claim to be Islam but reject the caliph means they are the same as rejecting the application of God's law, then they are among those who pretend to be Islam or hypocritical, or in accordance with the Quran Surah Al-Ma'idah verse 44 to verse 50, then they are unbelievers and fashis who all have the consequences of entering hell. History to the Caliphate. In the history of the creation of the universe, which was then created, the living creatures of the jinn and humans to occupy the earth, where the jinn people had already existed and occupied the earth before the creation of human beings starting from Adam, and the purpose of the creation of the two creatures was to become a servant obedient to God by carrying out all the rules and laws determined by God. Therefore, to enable the implementation of God's law in God's social relations, created the human nation starting from Adam and appointed as the first caliph on earth to lead both the nation of jinn and humans. Indeed, when the inauguration and appointment of Adam as the first Caliph, Adam had been met with the jinn and the angels and then ordered to respect him with prostration, but some jinn nations led by the devil had rejected the prostration's command with a sense of arrogance that thought that they were better, because they had existed and lived on earth first and were created from raw materials which they considered better than the fire without smoke, while humans were created from land that they were considered to be dirty. Actually, all the prophets who have the people as followers are the caliphs that are only limited to the people in certain areas, and some are symbolized on the global scale, such as the prophet Dud, Moses, Suleiman, Isa, and also the prophet Muhammad, who was sent to the people of the world. The history of the leadership of the Caliph system after the death of the Prophet Muhammad was also continued by his companions such as Abu Bakr, Umar, Usman, and Ali, known as Khulafaur Rashidin. So if it refers to the history of the Caliphate, the real refusal of the Caliph system has begun since the era of the jinn nation led by the devil, with the ongoing perturban that continues to this day by the generation of the jinn, who is indeed the majority and dominant as the population of the earth, because they were created and lived on earth earlier than humans. Of course, the efforts of the genie generation in the competition of power continue through various strategies and politics that they do, namely by beginning through the concept of division of Muslims into many sects, with the emergence of the priests of the hadith maker who try to determine various interpretations and narratives of each to enable the many differences in understanding the law and Islamic Sharia, so that Muslims are divided into many sects such another by making a narrative they call the hadith, that later Muslims will be divided into 73 groups, to support their argument. Likewise, in many of their hadith narratives there is also theory about waiting for the emergence of Imam Mahdi, who will become a caliph for the Islamic Ummah, so that it seems to weaken the struggle in upholding the caliph system, because it is enough to wait for the arrival of Imam Mahdi. It seems that this is a conspiracy so that Islam does not want to care any more with the enforcement of Islamic law determined by God through the mandate given to the Caliph. The struggle of the jinn in replacing and overthrowing the global leadership system of the Caliph is carried out through the doctrine of secularism that separates religion from the political and leadership system, which they spread throughout the world through the process of colonialism, and make the legal order system both criminal and civil, and make their colonies into an independent state using the form of legal order they made and integrated internationally through the nation's nation. So that it is no longer possible to form a caliph system on a region and global. The dilemma faced in the Almighty in the era of secularism. At this time where the ideology of secularism is developed, there is a very complex dilemma where many Muslims, including the ultimate people who have been contaminated with ideas and understanding of secular ideology, so that many begin to interpret Islamic teachings to harmonize with secular teachings, where this is a mixing between Islamic teachings and other understandings both in the connotation of modern systems and. The following are some of the responses that they made, which are a form of rejection of the system and concept of the caliphate, so that it is no longer possible for Muslims to control and regulate social system in local and state and global areas, so that Islam is only a name, and even though their identity is the majority of areas or countries, they are like dust and larans that fly unclearly. Some responses to people who are anti-caliph application from AI. The statement contains several claims that need to be responded carefully. First, the view that Islam without the Caliph is only a name because there is no authority to apply God's law in the secular system, and Pankasila is one of the interpretations. There are other views that argue that the application of Islamic law can be realized in various forms of government, including a democratic system by considering Islamic values. Claims that rejecting the Caliph is the same as rejecting the application of God's law and including hypocrites or unbelievers and fascis is a very hard interpretation and not universal in Islam. Many Muslims disagree with this view and assume that the obligation to apply God's law can be done in various forms of government. Regarding referring to Surah Al-Ma'idah verses 44 to 48 to support the claim also needs to be further investigated, because these verses discuss more about the importance of upholding God's justice and law in all aspects of life, not specifically discussing the form of government. In Islam, the Caliph is the leader of the people whose job is to run the government and apply Sharia laws. However, the view of how Islamic law is applied in the context of modern countries is very diverse. There are those who argue that the Islamic State ideally is in the form of Khalifa, while others argue that Islamic values can be realized in various existing government systems, including democracy. The secular system and Pancasila are different political systems from the Khalifa system. The secular system emphasizes the separation between religion and state. In this context, Muslims have various views on how Islamic values can be realized in the existing system. The view that rejecting the Caliph is the same as rejecting the application of God's law and including hypocrites or unbelievers of wrongdoers and fascis is a very hard interpretation. Many Muslims disagree with this view and assume that the obligation to apply God's law can be done in various forms of government. Those who reject the Caliph may have other reasons, such as concerns about authoritarianism or discrepancy with local socio-cultural conditions. These verses indeed discuss the importance of upholding God's law and justice. However, these verses do not specifically discuss the form of government or the obligation to raise the Caliph. These verses emphasize the importance of upholding God's justice and law in all aspects of life, including in government and justice. It is important to note that there are various opinions and interpretations of this problem in Islam. There is no one single view, and Muslims have the freedom to choose the view that is most suitable for their beliefs and understanding. The statement is the view of some Islamic groups that believe that the existence of the Khalifa, leadership of Muslims, is very important, even vital, for the strength and identity of Islam. Without the Khalifa, they argue, Muslims will be weak and easily influenced by the secular system. However, this view is not universal and many Muslims live in the nation-state and do not make the Khalifa the only ideal system of government. For some people, the Khalifa is a symbol of the unity of Muslims throughout the world. The existence of a caliph who leads Muslims is considered to be able to unite various differences and strengthen the position of Muslims in the global arena. Some sources of Islamic law state that the Khalifa has an important role in the application of Islamic law, Sharia. Without the Khalifa, the application of Sharia will be hampered and Muslims will lose comprehensive life guidelines. Groups that believe in the importance of the Khalifa are worried that the secular state system that separates religion from public life will weaken Islamic values and make Muslims lose their identity. However, there are also different views. Many Muslim-majority countries live peacefully and prosperous without the Khalifa. They argue that the application of Sharia can be done in various forms of government, including the nation-state. Some Islamic law experts argue that Sharia can be adapted and applied in the context of the nation-state, without having to demand the Khalifa. The opinion that Islam without the Khalifa is an empty name is one of the interpretations in Islam, but not all Muslims agree with this view. Many Muslims live in the nation-state and feel fine without the Khalifa. The application of Sharia and the ideal form of government is a complex issue and debated in the Islamic world. The statement that Islam without the Khalifa is only a name is a view adopted by some circles, who believe that the upholding of the Khalifa is essential for the strength and glory of Muslims. However, this view is not universal, and there are various reasons why some scholars do not actively fight for the Khalifa, including practical considerations and differences in interpretation. Some reasons why some scholars are not active in fighting for the Khalifa: there are differences of opinion among scholars regarding the ideal form of the Khalifa and how to make it happen. Some scholars argue that the Khalifa must be upheld through a revolution or armed struggle, while others prefer a gradual approach through dawah and education. Some scholars argue that political and social conditions are currently not conducive to the upholding of the Khalifa. They are worried that efforts to impose the Khalifa can cause chaos and conflict. Some scholars choose to focus on education and dawah to strengthen the understanding of the religion of Muslims and build awareness of the importance of the Khalifa. They believe that deep social change can only occur through individual and community change. Confidence about Imam Mahdi is part of Islamic creed, but there are differences in views on how to place this belief in the context of struggle. Some scholars may argue that efforts to uphold the Khalifa must continue to be carried out, while others may focus more on preparation to welcome the arrival of Imam Mahdi. In some cases, efforts to fight for the Khalifa can risk the security and safety of the ulama and followers. Not all scholars are silent. Many scholars are active in preaching and enlightenment to Muslims, although not explicitly fighting for the Khalifa. Confidence about Imam Mahdi is part of Islamic beliefs, but the way to interpret it and apply it in everyday life can be different. Ulama have an important role in guiding Muslims in understanding religious teachings, including about the Khalifa. The statement that Islam without the Khalifa is only a name is a view that is not universal. There are various reasons why some scholars do not actively fight for the Khalifa, including differences of opinion, political and social conditions, and focus on education and dawah. Confidence about Imam Mahdi is part of Islamic creed, but the way to interpret it and apply it in everyday life can be different. Of all the responses and statements, it seems that it is still unclear and ambiguity, because there is no response that refers to the Quran verses, but only an interpretation of reasons that justify their opinions. So Muslims need to return to the correct understanding of the Quran because all the verses described above are clear and muhkamat so that they cannot be interpreted according to interests which in the end are still a form of rejection of the Quran and the law of God that seem to not conflict with moderate interpretation. Thus this narrative is conveyed, hopefully it will be the material for enlightenment in understanding a straight Islamic Aqidah, so that it is not included in the infidel group, wrongdoers, fascis, hypocrites unconsciously, so that they have consequences for the hereafter. Amen.